All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking on a total paradigm shift. We are going to completely dismantle one of the most famous, absolute brain-breaking logic traps in human history. You know the one. We've all heard it, and let's be honest, we've probably all spent way too much time thinking about it. But by the end of this, I promise you, you're going to view it in a completely different light. Let's just jump right in.
Here it is, the classic riddle. What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? Now, the reason this question historically just sort of breaks our brains is because formal logic treats this clash as a pure, unresolvable contradiction. It asks us to take two impossible absolutes, jam them into the exact same system, and somehow expects a mathematical outcome. It basically frames the whole interaction as this apocalyptic collision where there's got to be a guaranteed winner and a guaranteed loser. But what if that premise itself is just entirely flawed?
Section 1. The classic paradox. To understand why we're so prone to getting stuck in this logical dead end, we kind of have to look at where this type of absolute framing actually comes from in our society. And impartially speaking, one of the main root causes is religion. Religious texts often use this absolute framing as an illustrative tool. And that makes sense, right? Because religion is fundamentally trying to teach people about concepts of God. It attempts to describe an entity as absolute force and absolute restraint, the unstoppable force and the immovable object simultaneously. But here's the absolutely crucial takeaway. These texts are using these terms to point at the exact same reality, just from opposite directions. They were never really meant to describe two opposing things literally crashing into each other. Yet culturally, this framing has sort of trained us to think in these extremes, rather than in terms of dynamic relationships.
Section 2. Relational, not absolute. Okay. Let's dive into this, because this is exactly where we move from absolutes to relational states.
We're moving away from the realm of impossible absolutes and stepping into the reality of relational states. Let's actually look at what these words mean when you strip away all that mythical baggage. On the left side here, we've got unstoppable. Honestly, this simply means the persistence of a process relative to some resistance. And over on the right side, immovable. This just means the persistence of a structure relative to some force. Notice that neither of these is an intrinsic property. You can't just pick up an object and say, ah yes, this is inherently immovable. No way! Both of these terms merely describe the outcome of an interaction. They are completely relative.
Let's ground this in some everyday physics with a really simple structure. Think of a cup sitting on a table. Relative to its own rest frame, sure, that cup is immovable. But, it's only immovable until a force exceeds some very specific physical thresholds. It's not just about mass either. It's about the material strength, the geometry of the cup, and the specific vector of the force being applied to it. Below a certain force, the cup is the defining structure of the interaction. It stays immovable. But above that threshold, well, the cup breaks. It reorganizes. It literally instantly stops being the immovable object in that specific interaction.
And that brings us to the fundamental rule you've got to remember here. The label always belongs to the interaction, never to the object itself. I mean, think about it. That exact same cup is immovable to the push of a tiny little ant, but it's entirely movable to the crushing swing of a sledgehammer, right? Everything in our universe simply exists on these different fractional levels of unstoppable and immovable. The exact same process that is unstoppable through one medium can easily be redirected by another.
Section 3. The water metaphor. To really help us visualize this whole complex physics concept, we're going to use a really tangible everyday metaphor, the interaction between water and that cup we just talked about. But before we pour the water, we need to define the absolute linchpin concept that makes all of this work, which is immediate potential. This is the tendency of a thing to immediately express itself or maintain its structure when constraints permit or when acted upon. This is really different from just existing as some latent stored capability. We're not talking about abstract stored potential energy here. Think about water for a second. Water doesn't need some theoretical trigger to activate. Given a gradient, it flows. Given a gap, it fills it, right now. That tendency is structurally available at all times.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this quote right here. This is absolutely the best compression of the source's original idea. It's like an immediate potential framing, really. A thing is unstoppable insofar as it immediately tends toward expression when constraints permit. And a thing is immovable insofar as it immediately tends toward maintaining its structure when acted upon. It's not waiting around, it's all happening right there in the immediate present.
And because of that immediate potential, the consequence is that every single object carries both of these aspects simultaneously. Take a look at this comparison. On the left, we have the unstoppable aspect. That's what continues when acted upon.
And on the right, the immovable aspect, what persists when acted upon. The interaction between two things in our universe is literally never a collision of impossible absolutes. Instead, it is always this continuous negotiation between these two simultaneous tendencies. So let's actually test this negotiation. Let's try to stop water. Every attempt you make to stop water is really just going to do one of three things. It redirects it, it contains it, or it transforms it into another state entirely, like ice or steam. But notice what doesn't happen here. The actual water process is never eliminated. You can stop a current for sure, but you absolutely cannot stop the capacity to flow. That flow ability remains present. It just waits. You literally can't stop water without turning it into an unstoppable object itself.
Section 4. Dissolving the contradiction.
All right, so we've got all the pieces of our new relational framework. Let's return to our original riddle, but this time let's apply it to our tangible example. What actually happens when the unstoppable force of water meets the immovable object of a cup? Well, in the relative frame, the answer is incredibly simple. The water just fills to the shape of the cup. That's it. There's no apocalyptic collision, there's no winner, and there's no loser. There's only a new configuration. The unstoppable and the immovable negotiate with each other, and they find a totally new state of existence together.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how that old contradiction just completely dissolves. The paradox breaks down because, well, neither the force nor the structure was ever actually absolute to begin with. Treating them as these rigid absolutes in the exact same system was just a massive flaw in our formal logic. Instead, when we look at it through a relational process frame, we see that each aspect is simply dominant within a very particular frame of reference. And that dominance, it's entirely dependent on the scale of the interaction and the timescale over which it occurs.
So, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. Think of a perfectly still pool of water. Is it ever truly stopped? Based on everything we've uncovered in this explainer, the answer is a resounding no. It is simply water whose immediate potential to flow is fully available. It's silently negotiating with its container, just waiting on a change in conditions. That unstoppable process is always there, waiting for the immovable structure to yield. Thanks so much for joining me on this one, and honestly, I hope you never look at a simple glass of water the same way again.